Wake up! It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 62, Sleep and Memory. You'll forget about me after I've been gone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Sleep Unplugged episode. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist and sleep specialist and your host for this week's Sleep Unplugged podcast. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're a veteran of the show, welcome back. We're glad you're here. Fun week. Great episode last week. Very popular. I thought it would be. Last week's episode, how much sleep do you really need? Got a lot of attention. And like I said in the podcast, it was an episode that I actually thought I had done at some point. If you had asked me, have you talked about the amount of sleep that an individual needs? I would say, yes, we've already done that episode, when in fact I hadn't. So I'm glad we got that out of the way. REM behavior disorder, you're just going to have to wait a little bit longer, but we will get to you. Got a lot of notes last week about the podcast and a couple comments that I think are germane to this week. First and foremost, I got an email from a guy that I work with. Met him with the Phillies. Now he's with the Dodgers. Great guy named Paul. Paul wrote, "Hey, Doc, hope all is well with you and your family. I had a question. One of my players came up to me and asked me about targeted memory reactivation. Have you heard of any of your colleagues talk about this? Is it in your book or your podcast? Thanks a lot, Paul." And I also met a woman. Her name is Katie. And she lives and works in Sarasota, Florida. Met her recently. And she said, is there anything to sleep and memory consolidation? She actually used that word. And I said, well, this is great. This is a sign from heaven that we need to talk about memory. So we will. Thank you both for communicating. Thank you for everyone who's written into the show and asked questions. We will get to every one of your comments in time. If you'd like to communicate with the show, you can always do that. You can find me Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Threads. We have a Sleep Unplugged page on our YouTube channel. If you look up Sleep Unplugged podcast on YouTube, you will find videos of all of our podcasts to date. This is episode 62. I've written 2 books, The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep is Broken and How to Fix It, as well as The Rested Child. And as always, we talk about music at the beginning of the podcast related to the title and the topic. And all of the songs that we reference are on Spotify playlists. If you look up Sleep Unplugged, Spotify playlist, volume 1, you can find all the songs from last season. And this season, the episode 2 volume is already out. So let's talk about sleep and memory. Before we do, our title, You'll Forget About Me After I've Been Gone, is the line from Boston's Long Time, a huge song, huge album. This was from their 1976 debut album entitled Boston, which before Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, it was the biggest selling debut album of all time. And like Guns N' Roses, Boston had a very difficult time getting somebody to put the music out there. So Tom Scholz had been working on the songs that appeared on that debut album for a long time in his basement in Massachusetts. He was an MIT brilliant musician, multi-instrumentalist. He played all the instruments on the songs and recorded it in his home, which is what he really liked to do. He was a big-time sound engineer, MIT guy. He designed a lot of instruments and devices that are used for recording today. If you ever listen to Rick Beato, he does some great episodes on his massive podcast about Tom Scholz and Boston, and just what a revolutionary guy he was at the time, getting the sounds he did, the overlays and all the things that make the Boston sound so unique. So he was toiling away in his basement, and he eventually got hooked up with Brad Delp, the singer for Boston, who's got the amazing range. If you think about the song More Than a Feeling, and they started putting demos out there, putting their music out, and somehow got the attention of Epic Records, who put their first album out there, and it was a atom bomb of an album. It sold a ton of copies. What was really interesting was it was so explosive in its popularity that when they first started sort of touring to support it, they really didn't have it all worked out. Tom had sort of put all this music together himself. He was pulling in musicians to tour with, he and Brad. And there was this great legend that one of his first shows he plays More Than a Feeling. And then they only had 3 or 4 songs rehearsed and put together. And so they were done. And the crowd was not having it. They were going crazy, cheering, yelling, stomping their feet. So they came back out and did More Than a Feeling as an encore. Now, mind you, this was like the 5th song they played. So they played More Than a Feeling again. And then the crowd went crazy, even more. And then say they played a second encore, which was More Than a Feeling. So literally they played 6 songs and 3 were More Than a Feeling, as the legend goes. And every song on that album was terrific, including Long Time, which is often played with the song Foreplay. So the song Foreplay begins the album, and then it has this great guitar riff and reverb that goes right into Long Time. Just a great song. And You'll Forget About Me After I've Been Gone over the hand claps. It's just one of the most perfectly constructed songs ever. So it will definitely go on the Sleep Unplugged Spotify playlist episode, volume 2. So let's get into sleep and memory. Sleep and memory has been studied within the field of sleep for at least 100 years specifically. But I think the idea of sleep and its connection to memory has been thought about and analyzed and pontificated about for a much longer period of time. And even going back to 1951, there was a great article entitled The Inability to Remember Dreams and Jokes from Psychoanalytic Quarterly. So even back in the 50s, this link between memory and sleep was being explored in serious and maybe not so serious ways. And when I think about what I do, so I'm a neurologist and sleep specialist. People always ask me, as a neurologist, what kind of, what do you practice? And specifically, I deal with sleep, disorders of sleep, both with adults and kids. Can't sleep, sleep too much, you wake up, can't get back to sleep, can't shut your mind off at night. These are the disorders I think about and deal with in terms of my practice. But it's very difficult to pull other aspects of neurology out when you think about things like migraine and sleep. But a big one is memory and sleep. So we see a lot of individuals who are struggling with sleep and have tied that in one way or another to memory. I'm struggling to sleep. I feel like if I could sleep better, my memory would get better. Or somebody with a primary dementing illness, grandfather is thinking poorly and memory is starting to collapse. And so too it often and does sleep. So one of the more interesting and sometimes rewarding things that I get to do as a neurologist is deal with somebody's sleep, improve somebody's sleep, and see what happens. So if we're working with baseball teams that Paul might work with, who wrote me, he's with the Dodgers now, and he was the one who had the question about targeted memory reactivation, improving a player's sleep might improve their performance on the field. But for a non-baseball player, improving grandpa's sleep or dealing with his sleep apnea or whatever might be going on with his sleep, taking him off medications that might be worsening sleep, which we see a lot in the memory care population. These individuals are getting up and wandering around, so they're put on medication to sort of sedate them at night, and they can have very deleterious effects on their sleep. So it's very rewarding to improve somebody's sleep and see their memory improve as well too. So those connections are very strong. And I'm not sure if we've talked about it on the show or not, but we've known for a long time that individuals who sleep poorly have poor memory. And that's both in the short term and the long term. Short term, you have a difficult night of sleep and you've got to memorize all these paintings for your art history exam. So you walk into the auditorium and suddenly Raphael, Titian, Michelangelo, Gauguin, all the masters are being put up on the screen, and you're having to identify the name of the painting and the date, relative date that it was painted, maybe its significance, etc. And you're going to do much better on that kind of exam if you sleep well. And so there's that short-term benefit. Should you pull the all-nighter and with your art history flashcards all night before the test, or should you try to get sleep prior to the exam? And Matt Walker, who we talked about in last week's episode, in terms of sleep and how much sleep do you need, and maybe some of that information being a little bit skewed to the scary. Matt did some incredibly revolutionary research about the importance of sleep and memory consolidation. And I remember, one very classic study he did where you would learn a sequence, a sort of a keystroke sequence, and you would see how many times you could do it without making a mistake, and then go to sleep. And then when you woke up, you could do the sequence better after sleeping, versus people who had the same time period between learning and rehearsal, the second rehearsal, same time period, it just didn't feature any sleep. So that sleep, we know, really helps to consolidate that memory. I've talked to musicians who say the same thing. Working on a difficult piano piece, when I go to sleep, wake up the next morning, I can play it very well. I always remembered it. I was never a big video game player, but when I had access to video games, Space Invaders or Pac-Man or something, there'd be certain levels that would be very difficult to get past. And these were very simple video games back when I had them in my bedroom. And I remember sometimes being very frustrated that I couldn't get past a certain level on Space Invaders or whatever. You would go to sleep, wake up the next morning and turn on the console and play, and you would just crush it. It was kind of like you'd sort of thought about the problems inherent to the music or the video game, and you could play it better or perform better with it the next day. So I always find that to be extremely important. And just sort of a disclaimer, if you're somebody who struggles with memory, talk to somebody about it. You could talk to a neurologist, you could talk to a sleep specialist. I'm a huge fan of neuropsychological testing, which is essentially you go to somebody who does this kind of testing, and there's not that many people who do it, and even fewer who do it well. And you sit down for 3 hours and you go through a battery of testing that looks at memory of different kinds and problem solving and calculation, etc. And then at the end, they say, okay, Chris, we're taking a look at your exam. And I actually did it. When I was in neurology residency, I did it just to see what it was like. And remember thinking about 30 minutes into the test, oh my God, I am failing this test. I have volunteered to take a test that when the results of it become known to Fred Wooten, the chairman of neurology at the University of Virginia at the time, he will fire me because I am not mentally competent to be a neurologist in the department that he heads. And I remember having sort of this panicky moment, and I'm not remembering things the way I feel like I should. And at the end of the test, they're like, okay, Chris, you did great. You were superior across, across the board. I'm like, well, what about that thing when you showed me 20 objects and I had to remember them? I feel like I only remembered 6 of them. They said 6 is superior. They said anything above 4 or 5 is normal, or something like that. So it's designed not only to stress, but to really push the limits of your memory and your abilities. And what's really nice about that is having that testing is intrinsically helpful in and of itself. But, as time passes, let's say 10 years from now, I really feel like I'm struggling with my memory, I can go back and reference that. And they can say, okay, Chris, well, you repeated the testing and we're comparing you to what you looked like when you were 31. And, there's no change here, or there is significant change. You need to get your affairs in order, kind of, so these things can be extremely helpful. So anybody who's struggling with memory, I would invite you to intervene early, because that's when neurologists and the medications that we possess can help you. We always say when you wait until grandma thinks Eisenhower's still president, the horse is out of the barn, and the medications that we have that do a good job of preserving memory, they don't necessarily regrow it, are really at their best. So let's think about how sleep impacts memory. And like I said, we have known for a long time individuals who don't sleep enough, who don't sleep well, have memory problems. And for the longest time, nobody really understood why. It's interesting. We observe things and believe things sometimes well before we understand them. And sleep and neurology, there's all kinds of great examples of that. REM behavior disorder, which is the episode we have not done. The idea that an individual could be conscious and paralyzed was thought about and postulated well before it was actually demonstrated, which was kind of interesting, or understood as to why that's happening. And I think sleep is sort of like that. When I was in medical school, we were taught that the brain did not have a lymphatic system, that there was a glymphatic, there was a lymphatic system throughout the rest of the body that removed waste products, but the brain didn't have one. I remember being taught that in medical school. Now, along comes a woman, Nettergaard. She's a researcher, I think, in Maryland, and she says, no, there is a lymphatic system. It's very difficult to see on anatomic dissection, but it is absolutely there. She named it the glymphatic system and discovered a lot of truths about it. One was that it was removing primarily beta amyloid from the brain, which is a product that accumulates. And when you look at Alzheimer's plaques and tangles and neurofibrillary tangles, you would see characteristic of a biopsied brain of an Alzheimer's patient, that's the main product that this lymphatic system is in fact removing. The second thing that was discovered later on was that this lymphatic system seems to be 10 to maybe 15 times more active during sleep versus wakefulness, which is really interesting as well too. So the more you sleep, the more the pump pumps out the waste products that may be accumulating to create Alzheimer's disease. And again, there's a lot of relationships in what I'm telling you, but there's probably a lot of truth in there as well too. So when we think about sleep, we're not only getting rid of waste products and improving brain performance and brain health overall, but there's specific aspects about sleep that are extremely important when it comes to memory. And one of the things that we think about with sleep is that sleep is important in terms of priming the brain for learning the next day. And for a lot of individuals, that seems to sort of center mainly around deep sleep, or what we would call slow wave sleep. Sometimes it's called non-REM sleep. So when you think about REM sleep, we commonly think of dream sleep, 25% of our night, give or take. The rest of sleep is non-REM sleep, and that can be divided into light sleep as well as deep sleep. Light sleep is often called N2 sleep, deep sleep, N3 sleep. There is an N1 sleep, the transitional sleep, that is very small amount of our total amount of sleep and usually somewhat irrelevant. It's just kind of that transition period. So when we think about slow wave sleep or deep sleep or non-REM sleep, it's really thought that that's priming the brain for learning. So when we don't get enough sleep, we don't have the foundation or the basis for learning and acquiring new memories the next day, which makes sense. I mean, stay up all night and then attend the art history lecture I was talking about earlier, you're going to find that the facts are not going to be as sticky with you as they were had you gotten a good night's sleep. And by some estimates, our ability to learn and retain memory, that priming pump, is reduced by as much as 40% when we're not getting adequate slow wave sleep the night before. So for all of you college students listening out there, and I'm sure there are 3 of you, or maybe 5, if maybe my son's friends are listening. So it's really important to get sleep. I mean, I want you to have a good time in college. College is the best 4 years of your life, and meet all these great people and do interesting things that you never tell your parents about. But it's really important that if you're trying to academically succeed, which makes the champagne slip and slide party on Friday night so much better when you've done well in your schoolwork that week, you feel like you've earned it. It's really important to get your sleep during that time, because you're priming your ability to learn the information. Now, once you sleep, let's think about being in REM sleep or non-REM sleep. We'll call it deep sleep just for the sake of this conversation. So deep sleep does a really good job of solidifying memories. And what I mean by that is taking what you've learned during the day and making it more permanent and often doing what is called reactivating them. So you went out and you learned to surf for the first time. I'm really interested in learning to surf. It's something I've always wanted to do. I've had lessons planned that were canceled by storms. The dude didn't show up. One time I went and realized I'd gone on vacation and forgotten my contacts. So it was like surfing your glasses, or so there's always been these weird cosmic things that have prevented me from surfing, but I really want to do it. So you want to learn to surf, and you go out there and you do it on day one. Maybe you're going to get a 5-day surfing lesson. So day one, you get out there and you're trying to get up and you're learning, the board, how to catch the wave and everything. And it's just kind of a disaster day. You had in your mind, I've got in my mind, I'm going to be a very good surfer when I do it, but maybe the reality is not. So you go home and you go to bed. And there's a very good chance that you may be revisiting those activities during deep sleep. And what that does is solidify these memories of learning to surf, which I think is really, really fascinating. And one of the things we'll talk about with Paul's question with the targeted sensory reactivation is a lot of times when you pair sounds and smells with the acquisition of memory, if you hear or smell those things during sleep, it can reactivate and improve your ability to do those things. So maybe you go home and as you go to bed, you're hearing the sound of the ocean from your Airbnb that you've rented, or you're smelling the sea salt while you sleep. It might actually be working to strengthen that rehearsal and reactivation of the memory. So when you go out for day number 2 with your awesome surf instructor, you actually do better, not unlike the piano, not unlike Space Invaders. So deep sleep's helping us to reactivate and revisit the dream. REM sleep is what's acting to help link them together. And so when Katie asked me, hey, is sleep important for memory? Yeah, Katie, it is, because it's the REM sleep, the dream sleep, that's consolidating the memory. It's taking that surfing and sort of linking it to other things. And this is kind of like skateboarding. So you're linking the memories of surfing with skateboarding, or maybe the memory of surfing with your instructor reminds you of skimboarding when you were little and went to the beach with your parents. And so it starts to kind of intertwine. My wife uses a word a lot that I use, which is schema. You're adding memory to an existing framework, which really helps to solidify, consolidate, and deepen the relationship that you have with that memory. And so REM sleep is really important to that. And so there's a really interesting article. It was from Current Neurological Neuroscience Reports 2014, differential effects of non-REM and REM sleep on memory consolidation. This was an Ackerman study. And basically what it was showing was that the hippocampus is involved in some types of memories. And so when we think about hippocampal dependent memories, we're really thinking about slow wave sleep, so deep sleep. And when you think about hippocampus related memories, so if you're taking a test in basic neuroscience, which of these brain structures is most aligned with memory? It's going to be the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is extremely important for declarative memory. What's declarative memory? Declarative memory is memory for things that are like phone numbers, or what was the date of the American Revolution, or what were the exam we were talking about. What was the date when Van Gogh painted crows in the wheat field, or whatever that famous painting is, or the room, his bedroom he painted, or which of his self-portraits, as you're going through taking your Van Gogh exam and trying to recall the dates of these famous paintings, that's a very declarative memory, and that's going to be related to the hippocampus. And so generally memories like that, again, birthdays of your friends, phone numbers of your friends, etc., combination locks and stuff like that, that's going to be very dependent upon slow wave sleep. So when slow wave sleep fails, we will have difficulty with those types of memories. So again, pulling the all-nighter prior to that exam is going to be problematic. Now, REM sleep, on the other hand, tends to deal with memories not related to the hippocampus. We call these non-declarative memories or implicit memories. Declarative memory is often described as being explicit memories. These are implicit. Well, so what are some implicit memories? Singing a song. Okay, you hear the foreplay. It's been such a long time. So when that's coming on, can you sing that song? So you've rehearsed it over and over. That becomes sort of a implicit memory. So singing, typing, boiling an egg, ironing clothes, getting dressed. These things are memories that are stored very differently than implicit memories, and generally rely much more on REM sleep. So when REM sleep starts to fail, we start to have more difficulty with these non-declarative memories. All of a sudden, sing this song, when your REM sleep is being disturbed because you have sleep apnea or something like that, and you can't really remember the lyrics of the song or things like that. So two very different kinds of memories and two different mechanisms through which they are affected by sleep. And sleep has been viewed and looked at in a lot of different ways. There are rodent models that have looked at sleep and human models looking at sleep. And this connection between our sleep and memory is really quite fascinating. There's a rodent model that they could see that memories were strengthened and rehearsed after sleep. There was some really interesting human models where finger tapping sequences have been shown to be strengthened by sleep. That was a 2000 study in Nature's Neuroscience, experience-dependent changes in cerebral activation during human REM sleep. So again, REM sleep, finger tapping, sort of a non-declarative memory that you're kind of working on in terms of picking out this sort of rhythm and showing that sleep plays a big role in that as well too. Our spatial memory strengthened the human hippocampus during slow wave sleep. This was a study looking at the ability to navigate a maze and how it was strengthened with sleep. So I just really cool research looking at that, really strong connections between sleep and memory. And I wanted to end the podcast just sort of briefly talking about targeted sensory reactivation. So when learning is paired with sort of a novel stimulus, a sound or an odor, it's been shown over the last 10 years where this has actually been looked at that you can sort of enhance memory with this. And if people are interested in finding out more about this, there's a great study in Current Biology called How Targeted Memory Reactivation Promotes the Selective Strengthening of Memories in Sleep. And that title is important because what the research has really shown is that this targeted sensory reactivation can really help individuals bring the memory into sort of a rehearsal mode during sleep. How much it's rehearsed and how much it strengthens the memory really is somewhat sort of state dependent. So I think that, to answer Paul's question, have you heard colleagues talk about this? Is it real? Yes, it's a real thing. I don't find a lot of colleagues talking about it, but there is some really interesting and novel research. And the best study that I've seen about this was a study by Roche. This was a 2019 study called Effects of Targeted Memory Reactivation During Sleep at Home Depend on Sleep Disturbance and Habituation. So what they were doing is they were showing, I think it was like Dutch-German word pairings. And it was a whole protocol of about 60 individuals, and they were teaching them the word pairings in these two languages and assessing them both, prior to sleep, after sleep, and then when they paired it with some sort of targeted sensory reactivation cue. And they found that, given good sleep, if the individual was sleeping well and sleeping consistently, that those individuals did seem to show improvement in terms of memory for these kinds of word pairings. So I do think there is, and there was something else about there was a research we talked about in an earlier podcast, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting about it, but where there was a piano keynote played prior to something that, a lot of times when you pair these sensory cues to sleep, you can help with memory, you can help with, reducing, nightmares and things of that nature, trying to kind of introduce cues into sleep that way. So I think there's a lot of promise to this. If you're trying to memorize Dutch-German word pairs, I invite you to check out that. But anybody out there who's really trying to improve the quality of their sleep, I think that simply getting enough of it, making sure your sleep is consistent. And if you're looking into some targeted memory reactivation, if you're trying to learn a language, maybe that could be helpful to you as well too. So that's it. Wanted to touch upon memory and sleep. Hopefully this has been interesting and helpful to you. Remember, it's not just REM sleep that helps and not just your deep sleep. It's all of your sleep that helps, all of your memories. So I hope you get some great sleep tonight. If you want to contact the show and talk to us about your experiences with sleep and memory, how much sleep you need from the last podcast, you can reach us at Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Threads. You can find us and comment on our YouTube channel. Check out my book, The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep's Broken, How to Fix It, as well as The Rested Child. Download our Spotify Sleep Unplugged playlist. Listen to a little Boston. Don't forget about this podcast. And until next week, sleep well.